the Western Roman Empire went away. Is there an immediate descent into a dark age, violence, civilization falling apart? Well, yes and no. Let's look at some of the places that were no longer part of the Roman Empire. In North Africa, when the Vandals, a German tribe that had migrated all across Western Europe, reached there, they created a kingdom with Carthage as its center. There weren't a lot of Vandals, probably only about 80,000 or so of them, ruling over between 5 and 10 million people. But the kingdom they ruled was rich, prosperous, not just for the Vandals, but also for their subjects. Taxes were lower because they no longer needed the massive Roman army or defeat the city of Rome. And the Vandals were bringing in loot from their raids. For most people living in Carthage and the other areas under the Vandals, life continued much as it had. Carthage remained one of the main centers for Latin learning and education, as it had been in the last years of the Roman Empire, or the Roman rule over North Africa, when St. Augustine had created much of the foundations of later Roman Catholic teaching from his home in North Africa. The main complaint most of the people conquered by the Vandals had was that the Vandals, while they were Christians, were not Catholic. That is, they were members of the Arian Church that believed that God the Son was less than God the Father. And unlike some religious minorities, now that they were in a position of power, they tried to bring more and more of their subjects into their own church, believing their faith was the correct version of Christianity. Now, away from Carthage and the coast, the Moorish kingdoms, or the Maori, people who lived inland in southern Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, actually also benefited from the Vandal conquest and expulsion of Roman rule. Now, independent Berber kingdoms, Moorish kingdom, emerged. These two were Christian and Roman. And while we do not have any really good written texts describing these kingdoms, we have inscriptions left by some of the rulers. One, King Masuna, ruling from Al-Falva in the west of what's now Algeria, then called Numidia, built up a fort in the Roman style around the year 508. He describes himself as king of Moors and of Romans. That is, both the people who still spoke the ancient languages of North Africa, the Maori, the Moors, and the people speaking Latin living on the coast. His kingdom probably lasted at least 200 years. Another more interesting one is from a ruler named Mastias, living in eastern Algeria, probably starting around the year 449. And he just gives a really interesting description of himself, saying, "I am Mastias, duke for 67 years, and emperor for 40 years. Never have I lied nor broken faith with either the Romans or the Moors. In wars and in peace, and against my enemies, God has been with me." If you calculate, he is claiming that he had ruled over his own people for 67 years as Duke of the Moors. And once there is no longer an emperor in Italy, he had declared himself emperor. This Roman emperor, Mastias, we know almost nothing about other than a few scraps of knowledge. There are other kings and kingdoms across North Africa that would maintain peace with the Vandals, that become independent. We see these large tombs called Jadars also in Algeria that are the tombs of kings that are little known. If you notice, these are massive. They do have Christian inscriptions and inscriptions in Latin on the buildings, and there are multiple of these. So we know they could read and write and speak Latin and were Christian. We know they were prosperous. We just do not know a great deal about them. Now, what about Italy? And Italy itself was the last part of the Western Empire to remain part of the Roman Empire. There, the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was overthrown by Odoacer, the Germanic general in charge of his army, on September 4th, 476. Odoacer declares himself to be king in Italy, gives out land and taxes to his followers, and continues to rule in his own right, while recognizing the emperor in Constantinople as somehow supreme and higher than him. One of the interesting things about his kingdom is Odoacer is not the leader of a Germanic group. He is the leader of an army. His kingdom has no particular identity beyond those who are in allegiance to him. This will create a problem for him. Just 12 years later, Italy is invaded by the Ostrogoths, those Goths who had been conquered by the Huns and regained their independence after Attila. These Ostrogoths are led by their king, Theodoric. Here he is on one of his coins with what was called a Gothic beard by the Romans, that is a mustache. Theodoric invades. Theodoric brings with him probably something like 200,000 followers. The war takes several years, and at the end of it, Theodoric, meets Odoacer to work out some kind of way to split Italy between them. During the discussion, Theodoric splits instead Odoacer in half with his sword. He gives out land in Italy to his followers, mostly around the city of Ravenna, a northern town in Italy close to modern Venice that is a major port, easily defendable because it's surrounded by swamps, and the new seat of government for the Goths. There, Theodoric has a palace, builds churches, leaves a lot of art, much of which has been destroyed. And like the Vandals in North Africa, the Goths in Italy are also a minority, probably about 200,000 people, maybe as much as 300,000 among a population of probably something like 12 million. If you really want to know more, you can order the book, Italy, Rome, and Ravenna in the Medieval Mediterranean World, coming out shortly. It's got a great editor. Now, Theodoric, from his base in Italy, is probably the strongest ruler in what had been the Western Roman Empire. Not only does he rule Italy securely, he also dominates the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Burgundians. People begin to think of him as a new emperor. This is the tomb which is built for him in Ravenna. He even brings the Visigoths under his direct rule through a governor, So he's controlling Spain as well as Italy. The Vandal kingdom definitely recognizes him as supreme in the West. But in the years immediately before his death in 526, tensions begin to grow with the Catholic Roman majority in his kingdom. And Theodoric has a problem. He does not have a son. His empire splits after his death, with the Western Gothic kingdom, that is the Visigoths, regaining its independence, and his daughter, Amalasuntha, becoming queen in Italy. What happens to her is really interesting, and we'll get to that later on this week. Now, speaking of the Visigoths are the descendants of those Goths who had fled into the Roman Empire at the time of the arrival of the Huns. They are the people who made their way westwards under Alaric, sacking Rome in 410, and then moving westwards again into Gaul, that is modern France, and settling in the southwest of that country. The area that is dark red here is given to them by the Roman government in return for fighting Roman enemies. From that basis, they gradually expand their rule until they control all of the southern half of France and most of Spain and Portugal. Again, they are a minority in their kingdom, probably about 5 or maybe 10% of the kingdom, of probably 6 to 8 million people. In 507, they're driven out of most of their territory in France, but continue to rule in Spain for another 200 years. While they're there, throughout this period, Spain is steadily getting poorer, its cities are shrinking. It is not a golden age for Spain. The Goths, while they were originally Arian Christians, like the Vandals and Ostrogoths. In fact, they're the original Arian Christian German people. They will convert to the Roman Catholic Church in 589, and from that point, the Goths and the Romans are really becoming a single people, that is, the Spanish. The Gothic kings will be the first Christian kings to have themselves anointed with oil, make the becoming a king a Christian ceremony. In fact, they're almost fanatically Catholic once they join the Catholic Church. There are regular persecutions of the Jewish population of Spain under their rule, which will come back to hurt them in the future. Unlike some of the other kingdoms, the Visigoths never have a successful dynasty. That is, what regularly will happen throughout the 300-year life of their kingdom is a king will come to power. He will have a son who will follow him. That son, or perhaps a grandson, will be overthrown by one of the other leading Goths, who will establish a new royal family, meaning that there's constant civil conflict, but Spain under the Goths is generally at peace with its neighbors. Now, the two kingdoms of the Goths and the Vandals, the areas around them, for most people, the end of the Roman Empire doesn't really mean a lot of changes. Taxes are lower, long distance travel is somewhat limited, and cities and urban life are gradually slowing down when there's a long economic recession going on. But daily life hasn't changed much. In fact, in all three areas, the Vandals, Goths, and Ostrogoths, eventually their languages will disappear and they will merge in with the conquered population, learning Latin, or rather the Latin dialects evolving into Italian, Spanish, French, and North African Romance, um, while the Catholic Church is getting stronger. These are the best cases. Now let's look at one of the worst cases.